There is a military base in Wisconsin where a black bear climbed a fence in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis and nearly started World War III. Not a drill, not a test. A bear tripped an alarm, pilots started taxiing nuclear-armed jets down the runway, and the only thing that stopped a thermonuclear launch was a man in a truck with his headlights on. Wisconsin is supposed to be cheese and Packers, right? But what nobody tells you is what they locked behind the gates. 13 places, 13 laws. Number 1 has been frozen in time since 1950. Let us see it. West Bay Lake, Vilas County, deep in the Wisconsin Northwoods, roughly 3 hours north of Madison. This is private property, and trespassing is prohibited under Wisconsin Statute 943.13, a Class B forfeiture that can escalate to criminal charges if you enter the dwelling ruins. Summerwind was built as a fishing lodge in the early 1900s and bought in 1916 by Robert P. Lamont, who later became U.S. Secretary of Commerce under Herbert Hoover. He hired a Chicago architecture firm to convert it into a summer estate. By the late 1970s, the house was abandoned. Then Raymond Bober published a book called The Carver Effect in 1979, claiming the mansion was haunted, and Life magazine ran a photo essay in 1980 that turned it into one of the most famous haunted houses in America. Locals insisted the ghost stories only started after the book was published. By 1985, the Vilas County Sheriff called the abandoned house a staging area for teen burglaries. On June 19, 1988, a lightning strike burned it to the ground. What remains today are crumbling stone foundations and chimneys hidden in dense forest on a private 1.5-acre lakefront lot. You cannot see it from a public road. You cannot reach it without crossing private land. And the ghosts, if they ever existed, now haunt a pile of rocks that smells like pine needles and regret. The most haunted house in Wisconsin is not haunted. It is not even a house. It is a lawsuit waiting for anyone who tries to find out. Carlton, Kewaunee County, on the shore of Lake Michigan, roughly 30 miles east of Green Bay. The Kewaunee nuclear power plant shut down on May 7, 2013, not because of a safety issue, but because it was no longer economically competitive. Dominion Energy could not find a buyer and decided to close it. The reactor is being decommissioned by Energy Solutions, but the site remains a secured radioactive facility because spent nuclear fuel is still stored on site in dry cask storage installations. Armed security patrols the perimeter. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission still oversees the site. You cannot enter the property without federal authorization. In January 2026, Energy Solutions filed a notice of intent to potentially develop new nuclear generation at the same site, which means Kewaunee may come back from the dead as a next-generation reactor. A zombie nuclear plant on the shores of Lake Michigan. The reactor is cold, the fuel is still hot, the security fence is still electrified, and the paperwork for a potential restart is already filed. Kewaunee is the forbidden place that might unforbid itself within the decade. Until then, the spent fuel sits in concrete casks on the lake shore, quietly radiating into nothing, guarded by people whose entire job is to make sure you never get close enough to find out what quiet radiation sounds like. It sounds like Lake Michigan and a Geiger counter. The plant operated for 41 years and generated enough electricity to power every home in Green Bay for decades. Now it generates nothing except security costs and regulatory paperwork. The decommissioning is expected to take until at least the 2070s. The spent fuel will remain radioactive for thousands of years. The security guards will retire long before the radiation does. Beneath the city of Milwaukee, roughly 300 feet underground, the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District's deep tunnel system is a 28.5-mile network of massive tunnels bored through solid dolomite bedrock, capable of storing 521 million gallons of wastewater and stormwater to prevent sewage overflows into Lake Michigan. Access is tightly restricted. The tunnels are inspected only about once a decade because the environment inside is dangerous, the air quality is unpredictable, and the infrastructure is designed to handle volumes of waste that would make your eyes water in every sense of the phrase. The tunnel system was built in phases starting in 1993 and represents one of the largest public works projects in Wisconsin history. When it works, nobody thinks about it. When it fails, raw sewage flows into the lake that provides drinking water to over 1 million people. The deep tunnel is the kind of infrastructure that only makes the news when something goes wrong, and the reason you are not allowed inside is the same reason it exists. What flows through those tunnels is not something any human should be near without industrial-grade respiratory equipment and a very specific reason. Milwaukee's drinking water comes from Lake Michigan. Milwaukee's sewage, when the system is overwhelmed, also goes into Lake Michigan. The deep tunnel is the 300-foot deep concrete promise that those two facts will never meet. You are not allowed inside that promise, but you drink the result of it every day. The deep tunnel cost over $2 billion to build. It has prevented an estimated 160 billion gallons of overflow from reaching Lake Michigan since it became operational. The tunnels are large enough to drive a truck through in some sections. Nobody does. The only things that travel through them are water, waste, and the occasional inspection crew wearing equipment that costs more than most cars. Juneau County, roughly 60 miles northwest of Madison. Necedah is a federal wildlife refuge covering 43,696 acres of the Great Central Wisconsin Swamp. Established in 1939, it became internationally famous in 2001 as the site where endangered whooping cranes were reintroduced to the eastern United States. Taught to migrate to Florida by following ultralight aircraft piloted by costumed humans who never spoke in the bird's presence so the cranes would not imprint on human voices. The nesting areas are behind padlocked steel gates. Only refuge personnel with keys can drive the one-lane tracks that lead to the crane territories. The birds deliberately avoid areas visible from public roads. The refuge also harbors wild wolf packs, Massasauga rattlesnakes, Carner blue butterflies, and Blanding's turtles. Entering the restricted nesting zones violates the National Wildlife Refuge System Administration Act and can carry fines up to $5,000 and 6 months imprisonment. The whooping crane is one of the rarest birds in North America. At its lowest point, the entire species numbered 15 individuals, 15 birds on the entire continent. The Necedah program helped bring the eastern population back from 0 to over 100. The gates exist because a single disturbance during nesting can cause a breeding pair to abandon their eggs. One curious hiker equals one dead chick equals one fewer whooping crane on a planet that almost lost them entirely. The gates are not there to keep you out, they are there to keep a species alive. The ultralight-led migration program ran for over a decade before being retired in favor of a natural rearing approach. The costumed pilots never spoke, never showed their faces, and wore white crane-shaped puppets on their hands to feed the chicks. The cranes learned to follow the aircraft from Wisconsin to Florida. Then they taught their own offspring the route. The gates remain because the cranes remember where they were raised, and they come back every spring. Statewide. This is not a single location. It is roughly 4,000 locations scattered across the entire state of Wisconsin. Before European colonization, there may have been more than 15,000 Native American mounds in Wisconsin, shaped like birds, bears, panthers, turtles, and humans. Perhaps 4,000 survive today. Wisconsin is the global center of effigy mound culture. Nowhere else on Earth has this concentration of animal-shaped earthworks. Every single one of them is legally protected under Wisconsin Statute 157.70, the Burial Sites Preservation Law, which covers all Native American mounds on both public and private land. It is illegal to dig into them, build on them, walk over them, or disturb them in any way. The Federal Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act adds another layer of federal protection. In 2016, the longtime superintendent of Effigy Mounds National Monument in neighboring Iowa was sentenced after stealing the bones of 41 ancient Native Americans and was ordered to pay over $108,000 in restitution. The man whose job was to protect the mounds was the one robbing them. Wisconsin's mounds sit in state parks, on private farmland, in suburban backyards, and along riverbanks. Many are unmarked. You may have walked past one without knowing it. You may have parked on one. The law says you cannot touch them. The history says they contain the remains of people who built a civilization so distinctive that nothing like it exists anywhere else on the planet. 4,000 grass-covered shapes in a state most people associate with bratwurst. Every one of them is a grave. Every one of them is illegal to enter. The most famous effigy mound in Wisconsin is Man Mound near Baraboo, the only surviving human-shaped mound in the world. It stretches over 200 feet long and was nearly destroyed by road construction in 1908 before locals intervened. The mound builders lived here between roughly 700 and 1200 CE. They left behind shapes that have survived 1,000 years of weather, farming, and suburban development. The law that protects them is one of the strongest archaeological preservation statutes in the country. Wisconsin takes its dead seriously, even when the dead are 1,000 years old. Portage, Columbia County, roughly 40 miles north of Madison. This is an active maximum security state prison, no public access beyond approved visitation. Columbia Correctional is where Jeffrey Dahmer was beaten to death on November 28, 1994, by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver. Scarver used a 20-inch metal bar from the prison gym weight room while on an unsupervised work detail. He killed inmate Jesse Anderson the same morning. Dahmer was serving 16 consecutive life sentences for the murder and dismemberment of 17 men and boys. Scarver later claimed in interviews that Dahmer deliberately taunted other inmates by molding prison food into fake severed limbs and using ketchup as fake blood. Whether that is true or a post hoc justification depends on who you believe. What is documented is that Dahmer spent his first year at Columbia in solitary confinement for his own protection before being moved to general population at his own request. The prison is still operating. It still houses maximum security inmates. The gym where Scarver picked up the metal bar is still there. The cell where Dahmer slept is still a cell. The only difference is who sleeps in it now. Columbia Correctional is not abandoned. It is not a museum. It is not a dark tourism destination with a gift shop. It is a working prison where like a serial killer was murdered by another murderer 30 years ago, and the state quietly kept using the building as if nothing happened. Because to the state of Wisconsin, nothing did. A prisoner died. The paperwork was filed. The cell was cleaned. The next inmate moved in. Scarver is currently serving 3 life sentences at the Centennial Correctional Facility in Colorado. He has given multiple interviews over the years, each time offering slightly different versions of why he did what he did. The consistent thread is that he was left alone with Dahmer and Anderson in a bathroom area with no cameras and no guards. The question the prison never answered is why? If these places are making you rethink everything you thought you knew about Wisconsin, hit like, subscribe, because the top 7 are even stranger. Apostle Island's National Lakeshore, Ashland County, Lake Superior. Gull Island is a flat, 3-acre predator-free rock in the Apostle Islands archipelago. Under the National Park Service Superintendent's Compendium, authorized by Title 36 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Gull Island and Eagle Island are closed to all human entry from May 15th to September 1st, with a 500-foot buffer extending seaward from shore. Camping, hunting, and trapping on the island are banned year-round. The reason is birds. Gull and Eagle Islands together hold 88% of the lakeshore's breeding herring gull population and 80% of the herring gull breeding population on the entire Wisconsin shore of Lake Superior. The island was designated a Wisconsin State Natural Area in 1992. If you land on Gull Island during the closure, you face a federal fine of up to $5,000 for individuals, up to $10,000 for organizations, and up to 6 months imprisonment plus court costs. 3 acres of rock, a 50-foot skeletal lighthouse, hundreds of exposed ground nests, and a federal law that says your presence alone is enough to cause a breeding colony to abandon their eggs. One kayaker stepping onto the wrong rock at the wrong time can collapse an entire season of reproduction for a population that has nowhere else to go. The fine is $5,000. The ecological cost is incalculable. Gull Island is proof that the most forbidden places are not always the ones with fences. Sometimes they are the ones with feathers. The lighthouse on Gull Island was built in 1868 and automated in 1950. The light still operates. The keeper left 75 years ago. The gulls moved in and never left. During nesting season, the island is so densely packed with birds that aerial photographs show more white than rock. The sound from a quarter-mile offshore is described by kayakers as deafening. You can hear Gull Island before you can see it, and the law says that is as close as you are allowed to get. Sauk County, between Prairie du Sac and Baraboo, roughly 35 miles northwest of Madison, authorized by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in November 1941 with a $65 million appropriation. Roughly 80 farm families were forced off the Sauk Prairie to make room. Badger manufactured nitrocellulose-based smokeless powder and rocket propellant for 3 wars: World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. At its peak, the plant sprawled across more than 10,000 acres. Production stopped in 1975. The Army declared it excess in 97. Demolition of its hundreds of buildings ran from 2004 to 2014. Active demolition and remediation zones plus contaminated areas remain restricted today. Soil and water samples have tested positive for mercury, lead, dinitrotoluene, and carbon tetrachloride. and nearby residents have dealt with polluted water supplies for decades. The land is being reborn. Parts are now the Sauk Prairie Recreation Area managed by the Wisconsin DNR. A USDA dairy forage research farm occupies another section. And roughly 1,500 acres have been returned to the Ho-Chunk Nation, whose ancestral villages were here before the army arrived, and whose people were removed to make room for explosives. The visual is striking. Vast restored prairie dotted with old concrete munitions bunkers and 3 preserved pioneer cemeteries the army maintained throughout the plant's entire operational life. They made enough gunpowder to fight 3 wars, but they kept the headstones mowed. That detail tells you everything about the place. The dead were respected, the living were relocated, the land was poisoned, and now the Ho-Chunk are back on the same ground their ancestors were buried in before anyone knew what nitrocellulose was. At its wartime peak, over 12,000 workers produced enough propellant to fill railway cars that stretched for miles. The women who worked the powder lines during World War II had their skin stained yellow by the chemicals. They were called canary girls. The canaries are gone. The contamination is not. Dodge County, near the village of Iron Ridge, roughly 50 miles northwest of Milwaukee. This abandoned iron mine is the largest bat hibernaculum in the entire Midwest. When the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Field Station acquired the mine in 1976, an estimated 75,000 bats were using it. By 2005, up to 150,000 to 200,000 bats of 4 species were hibernating inside during winter. The mine is gated and permanently closed to protect the bats from white nose syndrome, a fungal disease that has killed over 90% of northern long-eared, little brown, and tricolored bat populations in fewer than 10 years, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. White nose syndrome was confirmed in Wisconsin in March 2014 in a single Grant County mine. Most Wisconsin bat caves and mines are now seasonally or permanently closed. Recreational cavers must follow strict decontamination protocols. The Neda mine gate is not optional. It is federal and state wildlife law enforced by both the DNR and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The mine entrance sits in rural farmland. There is no sign advertising what is inside. Behind that locked gate, in total darkness, up to 200,000 bats hang from the ceiling in clusters so dense they look like fur-covered stalactites. Their body temperature drops to near freezing. Their heart rate slows to roughly 20 beats per minute. They will not wake up until spring. One human entering the mine with the fungus on their boots can introduce a disease that kills 90% of everything sleeping inside. The gate is not a suggestion. It is the only thing standing between 200,000 sleeping animals and extinction. The lock costs $12. What it protects is irreplaceable. The 4 bat species that use Neda mine are the little brown bat, the big brown bat, the northern long-eared bat, and the eastern pipistrelle. The northern long-eared bat was listed as federally endangered in 2023 after white nose syndrome killed over 97% of the species in affected areas. Neda mine is one of the last major refuges. The $12 lock on a gate in Dodge County farmland may be the most important piece of hardware in Midwestern conservation. Two Creeks, Manitowoc County, on the shore of Lake Michigan, roughly 80 miles north of Milwaukee, Wisconsin's only operating nuclear power plant. Unit 1 went commercial in December 1970, Unit 2 in 1972. In September 2025, both units received subsequent license extensions, allowing operation into the early 2050s. The site is guarded by armed NextEra Energy Security, overseen by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and supported by local law enforcement. The security perimeter is federally regulated. You cannot enter the property without federal authorization. Attempting to breach the perimeter of a nuclear facility invites federal charges that go well beyond trespassing. Point Beach generated 10,147 gigawatt hours in 2024, just under 16% of all electricity produced in Wisconsin and roughly 58% of the state's low carbon generation. NextEra states the plant powers approximately 1 million homes. Emergency sirens are tested at noon on the first Wednesday of every month within the 10-mile planning. Snung Zone. If you live within 10 miles of Point Beach, you hear the sirens 12 times a year, and you know exactly what they mean. Critics note that Unit 2 has one of the most embrittled reactor pressure vessels in the United States, meaning the steel wall between the nuclear fuel and the outside world has been weakened by decades of neutron bombardment. The plant sits directly on the lake lake shore, 2 containment domes on 1,200 acres bordered by dairy farms. From a distance, it looks like 2 concrete igloos next to a cow pasture. Up close, it is the most restricted 1,200 acres in the state of Wisconsin. The cows do not seem to mind. The NRC does. Monroe County between Sparta and Tomah, roughly 110 miles northwest of Madison. Wisconsin's only active U.S. Army installation, 100% checks at every gate. Random vehicle inspections. Restricted live fire training ranges where artillery, mortars, and heavy weapons are fired year-round. In use since 1909 when it was the Sparta Maneuver Tract. During World War II, Fort McCoy was the largest Japanese prisoner of war camp in the United States, holding roughly 3,000 Japanese prisoners plus thousands of German, Italian, and Korean prisoners, nearly 7,000 at its peak. The first Japanese prisoner of war of the entire Second World War, Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, captured at Pearl Harbor when his midget submarine ran aground, arrived at Fort McCoy in March 1942. The base also briefly served as an internment site for Japanese American, German American, and Italian American civilians classified as enemy aliens. In 2021, Fort McCoy housed over 12,600 Afghan evacuees during Operation Allies Welcome, following the fall of Kabul. The original POW camp buildings are gone, but placards mark the sites in a preserved 1940s commemorative area. Fort McCoy has been a prison, a refugee camp, and a live fire training ground across 3 centuries. The same barracks that held a Japanese submarine pilot in 1942 were used to shelter Afghan families in 2021. The Army does not do irony intentionally, but Fort McCoy delivers it anyway. The restricted ranges cover thousands of acres of unexploded ordnance. Signs along the boundary roads say it plainly. Do not enter. Live fire in progress. They mean it. Boscobel, Grant County, roughly 100 miles west of Madison. Wisconsin's Supermax Prison opened November 10, 1999, championed by Governor Tommy Thompson as housing the worst of the worst. It cost approximately $47 million. Inmates were initially confined 23 hours a day in cells with windows designed to be just wide enough to accommodate one eye. A 2000 federal class action lawsuit alleged unconstitutional conditions including extreme isolation and sensory deprivation. A 2002 settlement forced reforms, including barring seriously mentally ill inmates from being held there, and the institution was renamed from Supermax Correctional Institution to the Wisconsin Secure Program Facility in 2003. In 2009, the Associated Press sued to obtain video of a stinger grenade that was exploded inside a prisoner's cell. The inmate later settled an excessive force lawsuit for $49,000. The facility sits off Highway 133 east of Boscobel. From the road, it looks like a low concrete and steel fortress surrounded by farmland. There are no guard towers in the traditional sense. The security is electronic, layered, and designed to be invisible from outside. The people inside are there because every other prison in the state decided they could not handle them. The window is wide enough for one eye because the architects decided that was sufficient contact with the outside world. 23 hours in a concrete box, 1 hour outside it, one eye's width of natural light. The 2002 settlement said that was too harsh for the mentally ill. It did not say it was too harsh for everyone else. Boscobel is the place Wisconsin sends people when it has nowhere else to send them. You are not allowed inside. Neither in any meaningful sense are they. Douglas, Juneau County, roughly 100 miles northwest of Madison, an active Air National Guard base with restricted airspace and a perimeter you cannot legally cross. But the reason Volk Field is number 1 has nothing to do with what is there today. It has to do with what almost happened here on October 25th, 1962. At the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, a guard at a military facility in Duluth, Minnesota, roughly 300 miles north, spotted a figure climbing the perimeter fence. He fired at what he believed was a Soviet saboteur. It was a black bear. The shots triggered a sabotage alarm system that was networked across multiple air bases. At most bases, the alarm sounded correctly, signaling an intruder alert. At Volk Field, the alarm was wired to the wrong circuit. Instead of the intruder alert, the klaxon T Pat sounded was the one ordering nuclear-armed F-106A Delta Dart interceptors to scramble for launch. The pilots, believing World War III had begun, started their engines and began taxiing down the runway carrying nuclear-tipped Genie air-to-air missiles. Each Genie carried a 1.5 kiloton nuclear warhead. Volk Field had no control tower. There was no way to radio the pilots from the ground and tell them to stop. An officer had to physically drive a vehicle onto the active runway with his headlights flashing to block the aircraft from taking off. He reached the runway in time. The jets stopped. The pilots shut down their engines. The bear, presumably, continued being a bear. The incident was classified for decades. The officer who drove onto the runway prevented a nuclear launch triggered by a bear climbing a fence in another state. Volk Field is still an active Air National Guard base. The runway is still there. The alarm system has been replaced. The bears have not. Number 1 is not a place you cannot enter because of a fence. It is a place you cannot enter because of what happened when the wrong alarm went off on the wrong night in the wrong decade. A bear climbed a fence. A wire was crossed. A man drove a truck onto a runway. And Wisconsin did not start World War III. That is the most Wisconsin sentence ever written, and every word of it is true. Wisconsin hides 13 places behind locks, gates, fences, federal law, tribal sovereignty, nuclear security perimeters, and one very important truck with its headlights on. The state that gave America cheese curds and the Green Bay Packers also gave it a near-nuclear launch, the largest bat cave in the Midwest, a serial killer's last address, 4,000 ancient burial mounds, and a Frank Lloyd Wright Tower where they invented raid but you cannot climb the stairs. Every state has secrets. Wisconsin's are just weirder than most. Drop a comment with the place that shocked you the most. Subscribe, because we have more lists coming that will change how you think about where you live. See you in the next one.